My name is Angelina, and at 32, I was always the overlooked daughter in our wealthy family business dynasty. While my siblings basked in our father's approval, I quietly built Everest Holdings from nothing, becoming my father's biggest competitor without him knowing. That Thanksgiving at our parents' lavish estate, Dad gathered us for his special announcement. I felt a familiar ache of anticipation, wondering if my business success would ever earn his recognition. Before I tell you how I turned the tables on my family after years of being underestimated, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe if you want more stories about sweet, well-earned revenge. Growing up as a Westfield was supposed to be a blessing. Our sprawling estate in Connecticut, with its manicured lawns and marble fountains, was the envy of everyone in our exclusive social circle. My childhood bedroom had a walk-in closet bigger than most New York apartments and a view of our private lake. But despite all the material wealth our home lacked, the one thing money couldn't buy: genuine familial warmth. My father, Richard Westfield, built Westfield Enterprises from what he always called modest beginnings, though his definition of modest included a sizable inheritance from my grandfather. Still, I respected his drive. He transformed a small real estate company into a $50 million empire through relentless work and ruthless business tactics. His developments spanned across 3 states, with luxury residential complexes being his specialty. By the time I was 10, his name was featured regularly in business magazines and local news spotlights. My mother, Diana, played her role to perfection, the impeccable corporate wife. Her days revolved around charity luncheons, interior decorating decisions, and maintaining our family's spotless public image. Her carefully highlighted blonde hair never had a strand out of place. Her designer wardrobe rotated with the seasons, and her smile remained fixed, regardless of the tension simmering beneath our roof. She taught me early on that appearances mattered above all else in our world. "Angelina, darling, stand up straight. A Westfield never slouches," she would remind me before every social gathering. "And do something about that hair of yours. First impressions are everything." Then there were my siblings, Jackson, 38, the firstborn son, and my father's pride, and Catherine, 35, the beautiful, charming middle child. Jackson had my father's imposing height and commanding presence, but none of his business sense. Catherine had my mother's social graces and beauty, but shared her disinterest in understanding financial statements or business strategy. From my earliest memories, I watched our family business grow. While other kids had bedtime stories, I had my father's dinner table business discussions, though I was expected to listen, not contribute. I developed a fascination with numbers and strategy that neither of my siblings shared. At 12, I created a business model for a lemonade stand that turned a 300% profit in our neighborhood. At 15, I presented my father with an analysis of an underperforming property in his portfolio with suggestions for improvement. "That's cute, Angel," he said, barely glancing at my carefully prepared presentation. "But leave the real business decisions to the adults." The nickname Angel wasn't affectionate, it was dismissive. In our household, being called an angel meant being patted on the head and pushed aside. Meanwhile, Jackson's mediocre ideas received enthusiastic backing, and Catherine's complete lack of interest was deemed refreshingly feminine. During my business school years at Wharton, I graduated at the top of my class, while Jackson barely scraped through a local college with connections from our father. Catherine skipped higher education entirely, opting for a series of expensive trips abroad funded by our parents. Yet when I came home with honors, my father merely nodded. "Book smarts don't build empires, Angelina," he said. "Business is about instinct and connections, things you can't learn in a classroom." Westfield Enterprises continued to thrive through my 20s, expanding into commercial real estate and even some international properties. My father's strategy was traditional but effective: buy in developing areas before prices surged, build quality properties with the Westfield name, and sell at premium rates. Our family name became synonymous with luxury living in the Northeast. What my father didn't see, or chose not to see, was how the market was changing. Digital transformation was affecting real estate. Sustainability concerns were shifting buyer preferences. New financing models were emerging. I saw all these opportunities while working entry-level positions at his company, positions far below my qualifications. My suggestions were consistently ignored or credited to male colleagues. After 3 years of this treatment, I made a decision that would change everything. I wouldn't fight for a place at my father's table anymore. I would build my own. I left Westfield Enterprises without fanfare. My father barely acknowledged my resignation, assuming I was off to find myself like Catherine had done repeatedly. My mother worried about how it would look to their friends. Jackson made jokes about me finally accepting that business wasn't a woman's game. None of them bothered to ask about my plans. None of them noticed when I took out a small loan using my savings as collateral. None of them connected me to the emergence of a new player in the real estate market 2 years later. The seeds of my revenge were planted in their indifference, watered by their dismissal, and about to bloom in ways none of them could imagine. For the past decade, I had lived in the shadow of Westfield Enterprises. While my father continued to dominate conversations at rare family gatherings with tales of his business conquests, I smiled and nodded, playing the role of the dutiful daughter who had finally accepted her place outside the family. Legacy. My mother would squeeze my hand sympathetically under the table while Jackson and Catherine basked in our father's attention. Little did they know that my silence wasn't submission, it was strategy. 5 years ago, I created Everest Holdings under the pseudonym A.W. Bennett. The name was significant to me, Angelina Westfield becoming something new. I established my headquarters in Boston, just far enough from my father's New York base to avoid accidental encounters, but close enough to compete in the same markets. I hired a frontman, Marcus Daniels, a brilliant businessman in his 60s, who was eager to mentor a young entrepreneur and happy to be the public face of the company while I made the actual decisions. Where my father's approach to real estate development remained traditional, I embraced innovation. Westfield Enterprises built luxury complexes for the wealthy. Everest Holdings pioneered mixed-income communities with sustainability at their core. My father secured financing through his golf club connections. I created a revolutionary crowdfunding platform that allowed small investors to participate in real estate development. Westfield properties were known for marble lobbies and crystal chandeliers. Everest buildings featured solar panels, community gardens, and co-working spaces. The future of real estate isn't just about location anymore, I explained to my early investors. It's about creating communities people are proud to belong to, regardless of their income bracket. My business model proved remarkably successful. While Westfield Enterprises maintained its reputation among old money clients, Everest Holdings captured the growing market of socially conscious millennials and forward-thinking corporations. Our properties sold faster, our returns grew higher, and our media coverage expanded beyond traditional business publications into sustainability magazines and social impact spotlights. Within 3 years, Everest Holdings had grown from a small startup to a significant market competitor. By year 4, industry analysts began comparing us directly to established firms like Westfield Enterprises. I saved every article that mentioned both companies secretly delighting in sentences like, "While traditional developers like Westfield struggled to adapt to changing market demands, newcomers like Everest Holdings are redefining the plight industry." My father never once connected A.W. Bennett to his daughter. Why would he? In his mind, I was incapable of building something that could rival his life's work. The few times Everest came up in conversation, he dismissed it as trendy nonsense that won't last or playing charity with real estate. His blindness to my success was both painful and advantageous. The call came on a Tuesday morning in early November. I was reviewing plans for our newest development, a former industrial site we were transforming into affordable artist housing with gallery spaces, when my personal phone rang. Seeing Dad on the caller ID still triggered a complex mixture of longing and resentment, even after all these years. "Angelina," he said, his voice carrying that familiar authoritative tone that brooked no argument. "Your mother and I expect everyone home for Thanksgiving this year. No excuses. I have a major announcement to make." "Is everything okay?" I asked, genuine concern mixing with curiosity. "Everything's fine," he said dismissively. "Just be here, Thursday at 4. Your mother wants the whole family together for this." Before I could ask more questions, he hung up. Typical. My father had never mastered the art of ending phone conversations. He simply terminated them when he'd said what he needed to say. Within minutes, my phone buzzed with texts from both siblings. "Jackson Dad just called about Thanksgiving. Sounds big. Probably finally announcing my promotion to CEO. Catherine. Oh my God, just heard from Dad. Do you think he's finally retiring inheritance time? Their assumptions spoke volumes about their characters. Jackson always expecting the recognition he hadn't earned. Catherine perpetually focused on what she could gain without working for it. Neither considered that our father's announcement might not be cause for celebration. I responded noncommittally to both and immediately began my research. First, I reviewed Westfield Enterprises' latest financial reports. Being a privately held company, they weren't required to publish detailed statements, but there were ways to gather information if you knew where to look. I checked property records, tax filings, and industry databases. I called former colleagues who still worked there, framing my questions as casual catch-up conversation. What I discovered confirmed my suspicions Westfield Enterprises was struggling. 3 of their recent developments had gone significantly over budget. A luxury complex in Connecticut remained half-empty almost a year after completion. A commercial property in Manhattan had lost its anchor tenant. Most telling of all, they had quietly sold off 2 smaller properties at below-market rates, suggesting cash flow problems. My father's pride would never allow him to admit financial difficulties to his children. Whatever his big announcement was, I suspected it wouldn't be the good news my siblings anticipated. In the week before Thanksgiving, I prepared carefully. I had my team at Everest compile a comprehensive analysis of Westfield Enterprises' market position. I reviewed all contracts between our companies, including the confidential acquisition proposal I had been considering for months. I transferred certain documents to my personal devices and practiced maintaining my composure while delivering various versions of the truth I had kept hidden for years. As I packed my bag for the overnight stay at my parents' home, I carefully selected my outfit, a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit that projected authority without flashiness, accessorized with my grandmother's pearl necklace, the only family heirloom I truly valued. This Thanksgiving would be unlike any other in our family's history, and I was determined to be ready for whatever came next. The long driveway leading to my parents' estate brought back a flood of memories as my car crunched over the perfectly maintained gravel. The massive oak trees stood like sentinels now decorated with tasteful white lights for the holiday season. As always, the property was immaculate, with not a fallen leaf in sight despite the November weather. My mother's doing, no doubt. I parked my modest Audi behind Jackson's ostentatious Maserati and Catherine's brand-new Range Rover. My choice in vehicles had always been a point of contention. My father believed anyone with means should advertise it, while I preferred understated quality. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my overnight bag and the bottle of expensive wine I had brought as a hostess gift, a social nicety my mother had drilled into me since childhood. The grand double doors opened before I could ring the bell, revealing our longtime housekeeper, Mrs. Collins. "Miss Angelina," she said warmly, genuine pleasure in her eyes, unlike the practiced smiles I would soon face from my family. "So wonderful to have you home." "Good to see you too, Mrs. Collins," I replied, giving the older woman a gentle hug. She had been more motherly to me growing up than my actual mother, sneaking cookies to me when I studied late and offering comfort after particularly harsh dismissals from my father. "They're all in the main living room," she whispered, taking my coat, "and already on their second round of drinks." That was never a good sign. My father prided himself on control, particularly over alcohol consumption before dinner. Early drinking meant either celebration or tension management. The living room presented a picture-perfect Thanksgiving scene that could have been photographed for Architectural Digest. A roaring fire in the massive stone fireplace cast a warm glow over the space. Tasteful fall decorations adorned every surface, from artfully arranged gourds on the coffee table to a custom wreath above the mantel. The scent of cinnamon and cloves permeated the air from hidden diffusers. My mother believed real cooking smells should be contained to the kitchen. "Angelina, darling," finally. My mother glided across the room, her silk blouse and perfectly pressed slacks looking as if she had stepped out of a luxury catalog. Her embrace was brief, her cheek barely brushing mine to preserve her makeup. "You look professional. Couldn't you have worn something more festive?" Before I could respond, Jackson approached with a tumbler of what I knew was our father's expensive scotch. At 38, my brother had our father's height and broad shoulders, but lacked his disciplined physique, his once athletic frame, now softened by years of expense account, lunches, and too many nights at his club. "Little sister," he said, his voice slightly too loud, "still dressing for a board meeting even on holidays. Some things never change. Nice to see you too, Jackson, I replied evenly, noting the slight slur in his words. How's the Northern Development Project going? A flash of irritation crossed his face. The project had been his baby, an attempt to prove himself to our father, and rumors in the industry suggested it was significantly behind schedule and over budget. Perfectly on track, he lied smoothly. Dad's very pleased. From the corner of my eye, I saw our father's jaw tighten slightly as he pretended not to hear from his position by the fireplace. Interesting. Catherine floated over next, champagne flute in hand, looking like she had stepped off a yacht with her expensively highlighted hair and designer dress that probably cost more than what most people made in a month. Angel, she trilled, using the childhood nickname that had always felt more diminutive than affectionate. I swear you work too hard. Look at those tiny lines around your eyes. I can recommend my esthetician, she works miracles. I'm good, thanks, I said, accepting a glass of wine from Mrs. Collins, who had reappeared with perfect timing. How was your trip to the Maldives? Divine Catherine sighed. Though the new resort wasn't quite as exclusive as the brochure promised, I told Daddy we should buy it and fix it up properly. It has such potential. I noticed my mother's slight wince. In previous years, such a comment would have prompted my father to indulge Catherine with promises to look into it. Today, he merely took a long drink from his glass and changed the subject. Everyone's here now. Dinner will be served at 6. Until then, let's keep conversation pleasant. My father's voice carried its usual authority, but I detected something unfamiliar in his tone strain, perhaps, or resignation. Richard Westfield, at 65, still commanded attention when he entered a room. Tall and distinguished with silver hair and penetrating blue eyes, he dressed impeccably and maintained the fitness level of a man 20 years younger through daily tennis and a strictly monitored diet. Today, however, I noticed subtle signs of stress, a tightness around his eyes, a slight pallor beneath his perpetual tan fingers that gripped his crystal tumbler a fraction too tightly. As we moved through the ritualized small talk that constituted family conversation in our household, I caught fragments of information that confirmed my research. My mother mentioned cutting back on the household staff to just Mrs. Collins and the groundskeeper. My father deflected questions about the company's new projects. The art piece that had hung above the fireplace for years, an original Rothko that was my father's pride, had been replaced with a large mirror that made the room look bigger, but couldn't hide the absence of his prized possession. During a moment when Jackson was boring everyone with a golf story and my mother had slipped out to check on dinner preparations, I overheard a hushed exchange between my father and Catherine near the bar. But Daddy, you promised to help with the down payment, Catherine was saying, her perfectly shaped eyebrows drawn together in confusion. We'll discuss it after the holidays, my father replied tersely. Certain adjustments have become necessary. What does that mean? Catherine pressed. It means not now, he snapped, then immediately softened his tone. Don't worry, Princess. Everything will be clear after dinner. I pretended to be absorbed in my wine when he turned around, but our eyes met briefly, and for a second I thought I saw something unexpected in his gaze, something almost like regret. It vanished quickly, replaced by his usual mask of confident control. As Mrs. Collins announced dinner would be served in 15 minutes, I excused myself to freshen up, passing the partially open door of my father's study on my way to the powder room. Inside, I caught a glimpse of my mother on the phone, her voice low but intense. The papers are all prepared, she was saying. Yes, Richard will make the announcement tonight. No, the children don't know yet. It's a necessary sacrifice. What other choice do we have? I moved quickly past before she could notice me, my mind racing. Whatever announcement was coming, it was clearly not the joyful news my siblings expected. As I rejoined the family, the tension in the room felt suddenly unbearable, like the air before a thunderstorm, heavy-charged and promising destruction. The Westfield family dining room had always been designed to impress. 20-foot ceilings with a crystal chandelier that had reportedly once hung in a European palace. A gleaming mahogany table that could seat 20 but was typically set for 5, making normal conversation awkwardly distant. Family portraits of stern-looking Westfields from previous generations watched our every move from heavy gold frames. Tonight my mother had outdone herself with the Thanksgiving decor. The table runner featured real fall leaves preserved in some designer process. The centerpiece boasted an elaborate arrangement of seasonal flowers, pumpkins, and what appeared to be gold-dipped wheat stalks. The family's formal china and silver flatware gleamed under the chandelier light, each place setting perfectly measured and aligned. Mrs. Collins and a hired server for the evening brought out course after course of traditional Thanksgiving fare elevated to gourmet status: butternut squash soup with cinnamon creme fraiche, roasted heritage turkey with truffle butter under the Proust, skin stuffing made with artisan sourdough, and imported chestnuts and sides that looked more like art installations than vegetables. It was excessive even by Westfield standards, which only heightened my suspicion. My mother's response to stress had always been to double down on perfectionism. The dinner conversation remained superficial through the first two courses, focusing on Catherine's latest vacation, Jackson's new membership at an ultra-exclusive golf club, and my mother's successful fundraising gala for the hospital wing bearing our family name. I contributed appropriate responses when necessary, watching my father grow increasingly quiet as the meal progressed. He barely touched his food, unusual for a man who typically demanded everyone appreciate the expensive cuisine at his table. He nursed a single glass of wine rather than enjoying multiple pours from the $1,000 bottle he had selected. Most telling of all, he checked his watch 3 times during the main course, a breach of his own etiquette rules. As the dessert plates were being cleared, individual pumpkin soufflés that must have required precise timing from the kitchen staff, my father finally cleared his throat, signaling the moment had arrived. The serving staff discreetly disappeared. "I have an announcement to make," he said, his voice carrying the practiced authority of countless boardroom declarations. He placed both hands flat on the table, his wedding ring catching the light. "I've made a decision regarding the future of Westfield Enterprises." Jackson sat up straighter, adjusting his tie as if preparing to accept a crown. Catherine's eyes gleamed with anticipation. My mother's face became an expressionless mask as she folded her hands in her lap. "After 40 years of building this company," my father continued, "I've decided it's time for a change. Westfield Enterprises will be acquired by another firm." The silence that followed was absolute. Jackson's mouth opened and closed without sound. Catherine froze with her wine glass halfway to her lips. "You're selling the company," Jackson finally managed, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "But I thought I was supposed to." "The business landscape has changed," my father cut him off. "Consolidation is happening across the industry. This is the right move at the right time." "But what about the succession plan?" Jackson pressed, his face reddening. "You always said Westfield Enterprises would stay in the family. You promised me the CEO position." My father's expression hardened. "The succession plan has been rendered obsolete by market realities." "Who's buying it?" I asked quietly, speaking up for the first time. "And for how much?" My father's eyes shifted to me briefly, as if surprised I would ask such a direct business question. "Everest Holdings has made an offer of $50 million for all assets and properties. The deal closes next week." Everest Holdings, Jackson repeated, recognition slowly dawning. That upstart company with the sustainable building nonsense. "They've become a major player in the market," my father said stiffly. "Their offer is fair given current conditions." "But what about us?" Catherine interjected, gesturing wildly enough to slosh champagne onto the tablecloth. "Surely we'll each get a portion of the sale." Here it came. My father straightened his shoulders, his expression resolute. "The sale proceeds will be used to settle the company's outstanding debts and obligations. There will be nothing left to distribute." The pronouncement hung in the air like a physical presence. "Nothing," Catherine echoed, her voice rising to a pitch that threatened crystal. "What do you mean, nothing?" "I mean exactly what I said," my father responded, irritation creeping into his tone. "Westfield Enterprises has significant liabilities that have accumulated over the past few years. The $50 million covers what we owe with very little margin." "That's impossible." Jackson sputtered, his face now alarmingly red. "We're worth at least 3 times that the Manhattan properties alone." "The Manhattan properties are leveraged to 80% of their value," my father snapped. "The Connecticut development hasn't sold even half its units. The Chicago project went $15 million over budget. Did either of you bother to look at the actual financial statements I've been copying you on for the past 2 years?" Neither of my siblings responded. Of course, they hadn't read the reports. Jackson delegated all boring paperwork to his assistants, and Catherine had probably deleted the emails without opening them. So that's it. Jackson's voice had turned dangerous, a tone I recognized from childhood tantrums when he didn't get his way. You're just giving away our birthright. Everything you built, everything you promised would be ours. I built this company from nothing, my father thundered, slamming his hand on the table hard enough to make the silverware jump. And I can sell it if that's what's necessary. Maybe if you'd shown half the business sense I hoped for, things would be different. Catherine began to cry, her expensive mascara creating black rivers down her face. It's not fair. What am I supposed to do? My lifestyle, my commitments. You're both adults, my father said, his voice cold. It's time you learn to support yourselves. The monthly allowances end with the sale. Mom Catherine turned to our mother, seeking an ally. You can't let him do this to us. My mother reached for her water glass with a slightly trembling hand. Your father and I agree this is the only viable path forward, she said quietly. We should be grateful that Everest Holdings made an offer that covers the debts. Many families in our situation end up with nothing and public humiliation. As my family dissolved into chaos, Jackson shouting Catherine, sobbing my father defending his decision, and my mother attempting to maintain some semblance of decorum, I sat back and observed. The truth was finally emerging after years of pretense. The mighty Westfield Enterprises, the legacy my father had prioritized over actual relationships with his children, was facing financial ruin. And he had no idea that the company buying his life's work belonged to the daughter he had consistently underestimated. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not loudly or cruelly, but a genuine chuckle of disbelief at the perfect irony of the situation. 4 heads swiveled toward me in unified shock. Something amusing about our family's situation, Angelina, my father asked icily. I composed myself, setting down my wineglass carefully. I'm sorry, Dad, I just have one question. I paused, making sure I had everyone's full attention. Who exactly do you think owns Everest Holdings? My father frowned, confused by the non sequitur. Some hedge fund manager named Bennett. A.W. Bennett. What does that have to do with anything? And you've met this Bennett personally during the negotiations, I pressed. No, my father admitted. He operates through representatives. Very private individual, apparently. The actual negotiations were handled by their CEO, Marcus Daniels. He was becoming impatient. Angelina, is there a point to this line of questioning? I smiled, feeling strangely calm in the eye of the family storm. Dad, I am Everest Holdings. A.W. Bennett stands for Angelina Westfield Bennett. I created the company 5 years ago after leaving Westfield Enterprises. The silence that followed was profound enough to hear the antique clock ticking in the hallway. 4 pairs of eyes stared at me in varying stages of disbelief. That's not possible, my father finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. I assure you it is, I replied, and I'm prepared to prove it. The silence in the dining room was shattered by my father's chair scraping back as he stood abruptly. This is absurd, he declared, though the slight quaver in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. Everest Holdings is a $50 million company. You couldn't possibly. Actually, our current valuation is closer to $80 million, I corrected, calmly reaching for my phone. The $50 million offer for Westfield was fair market value given the debt ratio and property devaluation in your current portfolio. Stop this nonsense right now, my father demanded, but I could see the first flicker of doubt in his eyes. I had spent my life studying his expressions, learning to read the subtle tells that indicated when his confidence was genuine versus when he was bluffing in a negotiation. I have all the documentation right here, I said, opening my secure files. Articles of incorporation listing A.W. Bennett as founder and majority shareholder, board meeting minutes, financial statements. The acquisition offer signed by Marcus Daniels as CEO acting on my authority as company owner. I turned my phone around, displaying the corporation documents with my legal signature clearly visible. Would you like to see the rest? Jackson snatched the phone from my hand, his face contorting as he scrolled through the files. This has to be fake, some kind of elaborate forgery. Call Marcus Daniels right now if you don't believe me, I offered. I texted him on the way here that I might need to reveal my identity tonight. He's expecting your call. My mother, who had been unnaturally, still finally spoke. Angelina, if this is true, why the deception? Why create a separate company instead of joining the family business? I turned to her, appreciating that her first question wasn't about the money or acquisition, but about my choices. Perhaps there was more to my mother than the corporate wife persona she had perfected. I tried to join the family business, I replied evenly. For 3 years, I worked at entry-level positions despite my qualifications. My ideas were dismissed or attributed to others. Dad made it abundantly clear that he didn't consider me capable of meaningful contribution. That's not fair, my father interjected. I gave you the same opportunities as anyone else starting in the company. No, Dad, you didn't, I said, meeting his gaze directly. You gave Jackson a vice presidency straight out of college with no experience. You funded Catherine's lifestyle business attempts that went nowhere. Meanwhile, I graduated top of my class from Wharton and was assigned to file paperwork and get coffee. Catherine had stopped crying, her shocked expression shifting between me and our father. You actually own Everest Holdings, the company that built that gorgeous mixed-use complex downtown with the rooftop gardens. I nodded. Along with 15 other properties across the Northeast, our sustainable building materials subsidiary, and the real estate investment platform that's revolutionizing how smaller investors access commercial property opportunities. If you're so successful, why agree to buy out a struggling company? Jackson challenged, still clutching my phone. This makes no business sense. It makes perfect business sense, I countered. Westfield has valuable land holdings and development rights in key areas despite its current financial challenges. The Westfield name still carries weight with certain demographics that complement Everest's existing market, and the acquisition prevents a fire sale that would devalue properties in sectors where we both operate. My father had sunk back into his chair, his complexion ashen. All this time he murmured almost to himself. 5 years building a competitor, and I never once suspected. You never suspected because you never believed I was capable, I said, keeping my voice level despite the emotion threatening to break through. You never looked beyond your preconceptions. I literally put my initial and our family name in the company title, and still you didn't see me. This is manipulation, my father suddenly declared, his voice regaining some of its former authority. You created this situation deliberately to force me to sell to you. This is corporate espionage using inside information from your time at Westfield. I had anticipated this reaction. My father's default, when cornered, was to counterattack. I remained calm. Every bit of information Everest used in analyzing Westfield's position came from publicly available sources or industry data accessible to any competitor. I never accessed confidential Westfield files after my departure, nor did I poach any employees or clients directly. The acquisition offer was made through proper channels, evaluated by your board, and accepted as the best option available. I retrieved my phone from Jackson and opened another file. Here's the timeline of Everest's growth and Westfield's financial challenges over the past 5 years. You'll notice that Westfield's decline began well before Everest became a significant competitor, primarily due to over-leveraging on the Chicago and Manhattan projects and failure to adapt to changing market conditions. The room fell silent again as the reality sank in. 5 years of secrets laid bare across the Thanksgiving table. My siblings and parents trying to reconcile the daughter they had dismissed with the businesswoman who now held their futures in her hands. So what happens now? My mother finally asked, her social mask completely dropped for perhaps the first time in my memory. She suddenly looked older, vulnerable. Do you intend to destroy what's left of the company your father built? Destroy it? I echoed, surprised. No, that was never my intention. Then what is your intention? My father demanded, a hint of his usual commanding tone returning. To humiliate me. To prove some point. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that despite years of preparation for this moment, I was still dealing with my family. Complicated, flawed, but still my family. My intention is to preserve what's valuable about Westfield Enterprises while transforming it into something sustainable for the future, I explained. The acquisition isn't about revenge. It's about good business and, perhaps, about finally having a chance to contribute to the family legacy in my own way. Jackson scoffed. So we're supposed to be grateful that you're swooping in to save the day, playing the hero while we're left with nothing. I never said you'd be left with nothing, I replied carefully. I said the acquisition makes business sense. What happens beyond that depends on choices we all make from this point forward. What does that mean? Catherine asked, a calculating look, replacing her earlier distress. Always quick to identify where advantage might lie. It means we have options, I said, looking at each family member in turn. Options we should discuss after everyone has had time to process tonight's revelations. My father's hands curled into fists on the table. This company has been my life's work. I know, I said softly, and that won't be erased. But things need to change, Dad. They already were changing whether you recognized it or not. For a moment, I saw something unexpected in my father's eyes beneath the anger and wounded pride, a flicker of something that might have been respect. It disappeared quickly, replaced by a hard stare. You've clearly made your decision without consulting any of us, he said coldly. I suppose the Thanksgiving announcement was your idea of poetic justice. The timing wasn't my choice, I corrected. Your board voted to accept the offer last week. You chose to tell the family today. I simply decided it was finally time to be honest about who you're selling to. Honest, Jackson laughed bitterly. You've been lying to all of us for 5 years. I've been building something of my own when it became clear I wouldn't be allowed to contribute here, I countered. That's not the same as lying. As the weight of the situation settled over the dining room, the elaborate Thanksgiving setting now seemed grotesque, the perfect table decorations and gourmet food, a thin veneer over a family and business in crisis. Just like our family dynamics had always been. My mother, ever the practical one, even in emotional chaos, straightened her shoulders. I think we all need some time to absorb this information. Perhaps we should continue this discussion tomorrow after everyone has had a chance to rest and reflect. For once, no one argued with her suggestion. The revelation had exhausted everyone, leaving us in that strange emotional territory where even anger requires more energy than we can muster. My father stood without another word and walked out of the dining room, heading presumably to his study, his traditional retreat in times of family conflict. Catherine followed my mother upstairs, her calculating expression suggesting she was already planning how to position herself advantageously in this new reality. Jackson remained at the table, pouring himself another generous glass of wine and avoiding my eyes. I sat alone amid the ruins of our Thanksgiving dinner, both relieved that the truth was finally out and apprehensive about the difficult conversations still to come. The family business that had defined and divided us for so long was about to transform into something new, and for the first time I would have a say in shaping that transformation. By 7:30 the next morning, an uneasy quiet had settled over the house. I had barely slept, anticipating the confrontations that would inevitably come with daylight. After a quick shower, I dressed in another perfectly tailored suit, navy blue today, and made my way downstairs, following the scent of coffee. To my surprise, I found my father already seated at the kitchen table, not his usual formal dining room place. More surprising still, he was reading documents rather than his customary morning newspaper. My acquisition proposal, I realized, noting the Everest Holdings letterhead. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. You've built something impressive, he said, without preamble, gesturing to the papers. I spent most of the night verifying what you told us. Called in quite a few favors to get information on a weekend. I poured myself coffee from the carafe Mrs. Collins had prepared, giving myself a moment to adjust to this unexpected opening. No anger, no accusations, just a professional assessment. Thank you, I replied, simply taking a seat across from him. That means a lot coming from you. He made a non-committal sound, turning a page. Your sustainability initiatives actually show stronger profit margins than conventional approaches. I wouldn't have predicted that. The market is changing, I said. Younger buyers will pay a premium for environmental responsibility, especially when it also lowers their ongoing utility costs. He nodded, continuing to read. This strange peace wouldn't last, I knew, but I appreciated the momentary truce. The kitchen door swung open as Jackson entered, looking haggard. His clothes were wrinkled, suggesting he'd slept in them, and his eyes were bloodshot from too much wine and too little rest. Well, isn't this cozy, he said bitterly, the two business minds already carving up the spoils. Jackson, my father said warningly. No, let's not pretend, Jackson continued, grabbing a coffee mug with enough force to slosh liquid over the rim. Little sister played us all, and now she's in control. Why waste time with niceties? I'm reviewing the acquisition proposal, my father said stiffly. As should you if you want to participate in the discussion about our family's future. Our family's future, Jackson laughed harshly. You mean Angelina's company and Angelina's decisions. The rest of us are just waiting for whatever crumbs she decides to throw our way. I met my brother's angry gaze calmly. Nothing has been decided yet beyond the basic acquisition. What happens next depends on what roles each of you want to play going forward. Roles. Catherine's voice came from the doorway where she stood in silk pajamas, arms crossed defensively. What does that mean exactly? It means we need to have an honest conversation about the integration of Westfield into Everest, I replied. About who wants to be involved and in what capacity. My mother appeared behind Catherine, already dressed and composed. As always, though, subtle signs of strain showed in the tightness around her eyes. She moved to the coffee pot without speaking. I've asked Marcus Daniels to join us this morning, I continued. As CEO of Everest, he'll be instrumental in the transition. He should be here by 9. So we're having formal business meetings now. On Thanksgiving weekend, Catherine complained. The acquisition closes next week, my father interjected, surprising me by taking my side. Time is a factor. Mrs. Collins entered with a tray of breakfast pastries, her experienced eyes taking in the tension before she discreetly withdrew. None of us reached for the food. Before Marcus arrives, I said, I want to be clear about something. This acquisition doesn't have to mean the end of Westfield as we know it. My father's eyebrows rose slightly. The proposal specifies full integration of all assets into Everest Holdings. The legal structure, yes, I agreed. But the Westfield name has value, as does the expertise within the company. My proposal includes keeping the Westfield brand for certain luxury developments while bringing them into alignment with Everest's sustainability standards. Jackson made a dismissive noise. Sustainability, just a marketing gimmick. A gimmick that's earned us 40% higher returns than traditional development models, I countered. The numbers are all there in the proposal. My father nodded slightly, acknowledging the point. His expression had shifted from shocked disbelief to calculation, the businessman in him beginning to evaluate opportunities rather than dwell on wounded pride. And what roles do you envision for the current Westfield leadership? He asked carefully. This was the critical moment, the beginning of real negotiations. I took a deliberate sip of coffee before answering. That depends on what each of you wants, I said. Dad, your experience and connections remain valuable assets. I would welcome your participation on the board of the combined entity, though day-to-day operations would remain with the current Everest executive team. My father's jaw tightened at the implied demotion, but he didn't immediately reject the offer. Progress. And us, Catherine pressed. Jackson and me. That depends entirely on your interests and qualifications, I replied honestly. Everest operates as a meritocracy. We don't have symbolic vice presidencies or sinecure positions. Jackson slammed his mug down. So that's a no, after all your talk about family legacy. It's not a no, I corrected. It's an invitation to earn your place rather than expect it as a birthright, the same opportunity available to every other employee. This is ridiculous, Catherine declared. Dad, you can't seriously be considering this. She's talking about making you report to her. She's talking about business, my father replied, his tone measured, and at the moment she holds the stronger position. The admission clearly cost him, but it showed a pragmatism I hadn't expected. Perhaps years of business negotiations had trained him to recognize when to fight and when to seek the best possible terms. What about our family home? My mother asked suddenly. Is that included in the acquisition? I turned to her understanding. The real question beneath her words, was she about to lose everything familiar, all the trappings of identity she had built over decades? The estate is owned personally, not by the company, I clarified. It's not part of the transaction. Your home remains yours. Relief visibly washed over her face, and I realized how terrifying this situation must be for her. My mother had dedicated her life to being the perfect corporate wife, creating the perfect setting for my father's success. Without that role, who was she? By the time Marcus arrived precisely at 9, subtle shifts in the family dynamic had already occurred. My father had moved from shock denial to strategic assessment. My mother had begun to separate the personal implications from the business transaction. Catherine was calculating how to maintain her lifestyle in this new reality. Only Jackson remained entrenched in bitter opposition. Marcus Daniels, with his imposing presence and impeccable credentials, added another dimension to our family negotiations. At 64, he was close to my father's age, but represented a different approach to business leadership, collaborative rather than autocratic, focused on innovation rather than tradition. "Mr. Westfield," he said, shaking my father's hand firmly. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person after our teams have worked so closely on this acquisition." "You knew all along," my father said, not quite a question, "that my daughter was your boss." Marcus smiled diplomatically. "I've had the privilege of working with Miss Westfield since Everest's founding. Her vision for transforming the industry has proven remarkably prescient." We moved to my father's study for the formal discussions where Marcus presented detailed plans for the integration of Westfield properties into the Everest portfolio. Charts and projections demonstrated how the combined entity would be positioned to become a market leader in sustainable luxury development. As you can see, Marcus concluded, this isn't about dismantling Westfield Enterprises. It's about evolving it to meet changing market demands while honoring its legacy of quality. My father, despite himself, was engaged by the presentation. He asked pointed questions about financing structures, transition timelines, and retention of key personnel. The businessman in him couldn't help but appreciate a well-conceived plan, even if it meant ceding control of his company. "And the Westfield name," he asked finally, "will it survive in any form?" I stepped in to answer that question. "We propose creating a Westfield legacy division within Everest, focusing on the luxury residential developments that built your reputation. You would chair that division, ensuring the quality standards you established continue." A flash of interest crossed his face, with real authority over those projects. "Within parameters consistent with Everest's overall mission, yes," I confirmed. "Your expertise in that market segment is unquestionable." As negotiations continued through the morning and into the afternoon, the shape of our future relationship began to emerge. My father would indeed take a position on the board and head the Westfield Legacy Division. My mother expressed interest in continuing her role with the charitable foundation, which would be expanded under Everest's Corporate Social Responsibility Initiative. Catherine surprisingly identified an opportunity within Everest's marketing department, where her social connections and eye for luxury trends could provide genuine value. When I outlined the actual responsibilities and performance expectations, she didn't immediately balk, a small but significant sign of potential growth. Only Jackson remained resistant, rejecting every suggested role as beneath him. As the others began to see possibilities in the new arrangement, his isolation became increasingly apparent. "This whole charade is still just your revenge fantasy," he accused during a break in the discussions. "Making Dad bow to your authority. Making us all dance to your tune." I studied my brother, seeing beyond the anger to the fear beneath. "This isn't about revenge, Jackson. It never was. It's about building something sustainable in business and in family." "Easy for you to say from the winner's circle," he scoffed. "I didn't start out there," I reminded him quietly. "I started with rejection and disappointment, just like you're feeling now. The difference is what I chose to do with those feelings." He had no response to that, but as we resumed negotiations, I noticed him listening more carefully, his reflexive opposition gradually giving way to reluctant consideration of the future being mapped out. By evening, we had reached preliminary agreements on the key points of integration. The formal papers would be finalized in the coming week, but the framework was established not just for the business transition, but for our transformed family dynamics. As Marcus prepared to leave, he pulled me aside briefly. "In all my years in business, I've never seen a more skillfully handled negotiation," he said quietly. "You've secured the business objectives while offering genuine olive branches to your family. That's rare." "They're still my family," I replied simply. "Despite everything." After he departed, we gathered once more in the living room, exhausted but with the worst of the storm behind us. My father poured drinks, a ritual that had once symbolized his authority, now serving as a gesture of reconciliation. To new beginnings, he offered as a toast, meeting my eyes directly. Not quite an apology, but an acknowledgement of changed realities. As we raised our glasses, I realized that the power shift in our family was complete. But unlike my father's reign built on hierarchy and control, perhaps mine could foster something we'd never truly had before: collaboration based on mutual respect. 1 year later, we gathered again for Thanksgiving, though the setting and circumstances had transformed dramatically. Instead of my parents' formal dining room, we sat in the open-concept living space of my downtown loft, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the city lights. The table was still beautifully set, but with sustainable materials and locally sourced flowers, rather than imported extravagance. The past 12 months had been a period of profound transition for the Westfield family. The integration of Westfield Enterprises into Everest Holdings had proceeded largely according to plan, though not without challenges. The business press had initially feasted on the story daughter secretly builds competitor and acquires father's company, but the narrative quickly shifted to focus on the innovative merger model we'd created. My father had surprised everyone, including himself, perhaps by adapting to his new role with unexpected grace. After the initial adjustment period, he found satisfaction in heading the Westfield Legacy Division, where his experience and connections proved invaluable. Our working relationship evolved from awkward formality to genuine collaboration, though we both maintained professional boundaries during business hours. "The Charleston project is exceeding projections," he commented, as he helped me carry serving dishes to the table. "The sustainability features actually attracted a higher tier of luxury buyers than anticipated." "I told you the market was shifting," I replied with a smile. "Even ultra-wealthy clients care about their environmental impact now." He nodded thoughtfully. "You saw it before anyone else did. I should have listened years ago." These small acknowledgments had become more frequent recently. Not explicit apologies for the past, but recognition of what might have been if he had seen my potential earlier. For a man of his generation and temperament, it represented significant growth. My mother had undergone perhaps the most surprising transformation. Freed from the rigid expectations of being the perfect corporate wife, she discovered new interests and capabilities. The charitable foundation she now led independently from my father had expanded its mission beyond social appearances to meaningful community impact. "Angelina, the Community Garden Initiative needs your input on the financial model," she called from the kitchen, where she was actually cooking part of our meal, another new development. "I think we can scale it to 3 more neighborhoods if we adjust the funding structure." "I'll look at it tomorrow," I promised, momentarily distracted by the doorbell announcing more arrivals. Catherine entered with her new boyfriend, not the usual socialite or trust fund type she had favored in the past, but an environmental engineer who worked on Everest's sustainability team. Their relationship had developed naturally after she joined our marketing department, where she had discovered a genuine talent for translating technical sustainability features into compelling luxury selling points. "The holiday campaign is ready to launch," she announced, handing me a tablet displaying the final designs. "We're highlighting the reduced carbon footprint alongside the luxury amenities, exactly as discussed." I reviewed the materials, impressed by how she had evolved from viewing sustainability as a gimmick to becoming one of its most effective advocates within the luxury market segment. Her social connections, once devoted solely to maintaining appearances, now served to influence key demographics toward more responsible choices. The last to arrive was Jackson, still the most resistant to our family's transformed reality. He had initially refused any position within the restructured company, determined to prove he could succeed on his own. 6 difficult months of failed ventures followed before he finally accepted a junior position in Everest's development division. "Traffic was insane," he muttered, by way of greeting, though the tension that had characterized his every interaction in the early days of the transition had diminished considerably. "How's the Philadelphia site assessment going?" I asked, as he poured himself a drink, just one I noticed another change from his previous habits. "Completed the initial analysis yesterday," he replied, a hint of pride breaking through his practiced indifference. "The contamination isn't as bad as we feared. Remediation costs should come in under budget." He had discovered an unexpected aptitude for site selection and preparation, his natural competitiveness, finding healthy expression in solving complex development challenges. Starting at the bottom rather than in an unearned executive position had been a bitter pill initially, but the genuine accomplishments that followed had begun to build something he had never truly had before: self-earned confidence. As we gathered around the table, I took a moment to appreciate how far we had come. The family that had been fractured by secrets and resentment was finding its way towards something healthier. Not perfect, we still had moments of tension and misunderstanding, but grounded in more authentic relationships than we had ever managed before. "Before we eat," my father said, standing with glass in hand, "I'd like to say something." He paused uncharacteristically, searching for words. "A year ago, I thought I was facing the end of everything I had built. Instead, I've learned that sometimes what looks like an ending is actually—" He glanced at me, a necessary transformation. Westfield Enterprises couldn't have survived in its original form. Angelina saw that when I couldn't or wouldn't. And rather than let it collapse, she found a way to preserve what mattered while building something stronger. The admission clearly cost him some pride, but the fact that he made it at all represented how far he had come. To transformation, he concluded, raising his glass, and to the daughter who taught her old man a few things about business after all. As dinner progressed, our conversation flowed more naturally than it ever had in our formal family gatherings of the past. We discussed business. Yes, it remained the strongest common language we shared, but also books, current events, and even occasional personal revelations that would have been unthinkable in our previous family dynamic. Later, as we moved to the living area for dessert, my mother sat beside me on the sofa. "I never properly apologized," she said quietly, "for not supporting you more when you were younger." "You were in a difficult position yourself," I acknowledged. "Yes, but I could have done more," she insisted. "I saw your potential, your intelligence. I just didn't have the courage to challenge the system we were all part of." "We're building something better now," I assured her, realizing that my own healing process had progressed further than I had recognized. The angry, wounded daughter who had created Everest partly out of defiance had evolved along with the company and family she now led. The journey hadn't been easy. During the first months after the acquisition, I had sometimes questioned my decision to bring my family into my carefully built world rather than simply leaving them behind. There had been moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves, my father attempting to overrule decisions, Jackson sabotaging projects out of resentment, Catherine expecting special treatment. Each time I had stood firm on the new principles governing both our business and family relationships: respect earned through actions, not demanded through position, opportunities based on merit, not entitlement, transparency in all dealings, even difficult ones. Gradually, these principles had taken root, changing not just how we worked together, but how we related to one another. As the evening wound down and family members began to depart, my father lingered, examining the architectural models displayed in my home office. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I spent decades building something I thought would be my legacy. I never realized that my true legacy might be you, not as a mirror of myself, but as someone who took what I started and made it better." The acknowledgement brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "That means a lot coming from you." He nodded, uncharacteristically emotional himself. "I wish I had seen it sooner. All those years wasted." "Not wasted," I corrected gently. "They shaped both of us. They made me build Everest the way I did. They made you capable of the changes you've embraced this past year. Neither would have happened if our path had been smoother." He considered this, then asked the question I sensed had been on his mind throughout our transformation. "Did you do it all for revenge, in the beginning at least?" I took my time answering, wanting to give him the honest reflection he deserved. "Not revenge exactly. Validation, perhaps. Proof that I was capable of everything you thought I wasn't. But it became something more along the way, a genuine mission to transform our industry, to build something meaningful that could outlast both of us." He accepted this with a thoughtful nod before taking his leave. As I closed the door behind the last of my family members, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with business success or financial achievement. The wounded place within me that had driven my early ambitions had begun to heal, replaced by something more sustainable than revenge or validation: the satisfaction of having built something worthy, both in business and in my most challenging relationships. The path forward remained complex. Our family bonds, strengthened through crisis and transformation, would still face tests and strains. The business would encounter new challenges requiring difficult decisions. But we now face these realities from a foundation of earned respect rather than inherited position or hidden resentment. In the quiet of my apartment looking out at the city lights, I reflected on the most important lesson of my journey. True power comes not from controlling others, but from mastering yourself. Not from seeking approval, but from believing in your own vision. Not from fighting old battles, but from building new possibilities. If you're watching this and struggling with family who doesn't see your potential or value your contributions, remember that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's creating success so undeniable. They have no choice but to see you clearly at last. The sweetest victory isn't in humiliating those who dismissed you, but in creating opportunity for everyone to grow beyond the limitations of the past. Have you ever had to prove your worth to family members who underestimated you? What did you learn from that experience? Share your story in the comments below, and if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes being underestimated is your greatest advantage if you have the courage to use it.